Barry, there's been some discussion in the media, the narrative being that China's economy is actually very strong, and therefore China can play tough against Trump. What do you say to that?
China's economy is, I agree with Treasury Secretary Bessent. It's in a recession and it could turn into a depression. Now, having said that, I do have a small long position in China that I initiated after the election under the thesis that President Trump would leave President Xi no alternative but to start moving away from their mercantilist policies and trying to spur domestic demand. So I think that will happen because they have no alternatives. They've way overplayed their hand. They have massive excess capacity. They have producer price deflation, consumer price, disinflation, deflation. They are in a world of hurt. This is the right thing for them to do. And I think they have no alternative. So it's worth having a small position there. I have a similar small position in Germany for essentially the same thesis that they'll give up on this expansion of globalization that was over 10 years ago. And so it makes sense to have, your toe in the ocean on these things. But these countries, Germany and China, have massive problems, over reliance on exports. Like this whole mercantilism thing goes back to Spain and Portugal, and it just continues to fail, but countries continue to try it. So there's my broad view on that.
Well, and I think it's important to talk about this because there has, again, in the news, the media, saying that U.S. exceptionalism is over. And I'm always looking at U.S. companies as exceptional and therefore wanting to put money to work when these stocks are down 20, 30%. So it sounds as though you're on that same page. And then also, though, because these countries have been operating poorly internally, they're now going to, we saw this out of Germany, they're going to stimulate their own countries. So maybe, you can ride their own stock exchange a little bit.
Well, that's the basic theory here, is the idea that Germany is now going to finally start to stimulate domestic demand. Now, the way they're doing it is, call it modern supply side economics or Bidenomics, which is basically the government allocating the resources, which will be incredibly inefficient, right? They're going to spend $500 billion on infrastructure. $100 billion of that has to go into green energy. There's a waste of money. Right. And so it's not going to be an efficient allocation, but at least, they're moving away from what I'm calling repudiating Merkelism, because Angela Merkel drove him off a cliff. And so they're moving in the right direction, but not really in the way that is allowing the market to allocate capital, what Hayek called the spontaneous economic order. So, that's why I say it's a small long. I'm not too excited about it.
Yeah, I understand. But American exceptionalism in your mind is still alive and very well.
Yeah, it's really, American exceptionalism means you're overweight technology. And so if you underweight the U.S., that means you're underweight tech. And I wouldn't bet against the U.S. technology sector. So, there you have it.
Okay. And just because we only have a few minutes left, but where do you see then inflation expectations? What should everyday individuals be prepared for as relates to inflation? And does the Fed step in, or are they going to just stand pat as they say they are going to do?
Yeah, there was an important speech by Governor Waller, who I think is the real thought leader. Powell seems to adopt Waller's ideas continuously, and he essentially validated something that the market's been saying for months. So not to get too technical about all this, but if you decompose the 2s10s Treasury curve, right, this famous indicator, into its real rate component, which is sort of a proxy for growth, and the inflation component is deeply inverted, just as it was in the spring of 2022, right before inflation peaked. So it's telling you, yes, inflation will go up in the near term, but then it'll go down. And this is what Waller said, and it'll go down sharply. And the real curve is very steep, telling you, yeah, there's going to be a near-term hit to growth, but then it'll improve. And in essence, what Waller is saying is, the fallout from the growth side is a much bigger deal than the inflation side. And so, yes, the Fed should probably respond to this, and they will. And I still think the Fed will cut a full percent this year. And
Hmm.
as we move into the second half of the year, we get through this initial shock. We will be in a much better spot in the U.S.
Okay, Barry, we're going to leave it there. Great to get your perspective as always. Thank you.